Story 1. Late one winter night, a college student named Daniel was driving home after finishing a late shift at a grocery store just outside a small town in northern Ohio. The roads were nearly empty, and the temperature had dropped well below freezing. Thin patches of fog drifted across the rural highway as Daniel drove through long stretches of farmland, broken only by scattered houses and empty fields. Daniel had taken that route hundreds of times before. It was the fastest way home, even though it cut through several miles of dark back roads where streetlights were rare. Most nights, it was peaceful, just the hum of the engine, the faint sound of tires on asphalt, and the occasional headlights of another car passing in the opposite direction. Around 1:40 in the morning, Daniel noticed something unusual up ahead. At first, he thought it was just a person walking along the shoulder of the road, but as his headlights got closer, he realized the figure wasn't moving. A man was standing completely still near the edge of the pavement. He wore dark clothing that blended into the surrounding night, and his head was tilted slightly downward as if he were staring at the ground. Daniel slowed his car instinctively. The man didn't react to the approaching headlights. He didn't wave, didn't step back, didn't even look up. As Daniel drove past, he glanced out the passenger side window. For a split second, the man lifted his head. Their eyes met. Daniel immediately felt a chill run through him. The man's face looked strangely pale, almost gray under the headlights. His expression was completely blank, like he wasn't really aware where he was. Daniel kept driving, trying to brush it off. Maybe the guy's car had broken down nearby. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But something about the encounter felt wrong. About 2 minutes later, Daniel reached a long stretch of road where the trees closed in on both sides, forming a dark tunnel over the asphalt. That's when he saw the figure again. This time, the man was standing directly in the middle of the road. Daniel slammed on the brakes. The car skidded slightly on the icy pavement before stopping about 30 feet away from the man. His heart started pounding. It was the same person, same dark clothes, same pale face, and he was just standing there, not moving. Daniel leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "Hey!" he shouted through the closed window. No response. The figure remained completely motionless. For a moment, Daniel considered getting out of the car to check on him, but something deep in his gut told him that was a terrible idea. Instead, he slowly steered the car around the man, keeping as much distance as possible. As he passed, he looked out the window again. The man's head slowly turned, following the car, but his body stayed perfectly still. Daniel pressed the gas and drove the rest of the way home as quickly as he could. When he finally pulled into his driveway, he felt relieved just to be somewhere familiar. But that feeling didn't last long. As he stepped out of the car, something caught his attention across the street. Under the dim glow of a street lamp, someone was standing near the sidewalk. Daniel froze. It was the same man, same pale face, same blank expression, just standing there, watching the house. The moment Daniel looked directly at him, the man slowly lowered his head again, and without making a sound, he turned and walked into the darkness between two houses. Daniel rushed inside and locked the door. The next morning, he told his parents what had happened. They assumed he had imagined it, maybe exhaustion from working late, maybe just nerves from driving alone at night. Daniel almost convinced himself they were right, until 3 days later, when he opened the local newspaper and saw a small article about a man who had died weeks earlier after being struck by a car on that same stretch of road. The article included a photo. Daniel immediately recognized the face. It was the man who had been standing in the road. Story 2. Several years ago, a security guard named Marcus worked overnight shifts at a storage facility on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. The job was quiet, sometimes painfully boring. Most nights consisted of sitting in a small office watching security cameras while the desert wind rattled the metal fences outside. The facility covered several acres, filled with long rows of storage units separated by narrow driveways. After midnight, the place was completely empty, or at least it was supposed to be. One night, around 2:30 a.m., Marcus noticed something strange on one of the camera monitors. A unit door near the far end of the property was slightly open. That wasn't normal. The facility required customers to fully close and lock their units before leaving, and the gate system logged every vehicle entering or exiting. Marcus checked the log. No one had entered the property for hours. At first, he assumed someone had simply forgotten to close their door earlier that evening. Still, it was part of his job to investigate. Marcus grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside into the cold desert air. The wind had picked up, pushing loose gravel across the pavement as he walked between rows of storage units. When he reached the open door, it creaked softly in the wind. Marcus shined the flashlight inside. The unit was completely empty. Bare concrete floor, no boxes, no furniture, nothing. He stepped inside to pull the door down. That's when he heard something behind him. Footsteps, slow footsteps echoing down the narrow lane between units. Marcus turned around quickly. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty driveway. No one was there. "Hello?" he called out. The only response was the wind. Marcus waited a moment, listening carefully. Nothing. He closed the storage unit and began walking back toward the office. Halfway there, he heard the footsteps again. This time, they were closer, crunching slowly over gravel. Marcus spun around. The flashlight beam swept across the rows of metal doors. Still nothing, but the footsteps stopped the moment he turned. Marcus stood there for nearly a minute staring into the darkness. Then, just as he started walking again, the footsteps resumed. Directly behind him, Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. He slowly turned around one more time, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw someone standing at the end of the row, a tall shape, perfectly still. But when he shined the flashlight directly at it, there was nothing there. Marcus walked back to the office much faster after that. The rest of the night passed without incident. But the next evening, when Marcus arrived for his shift, the day manager pulled him aside. "Did you walk through Section D last night?" the manager asked. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, one of the units was open." The manager frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because Section D hasn't been rented in years." Marcus felt a chill run through him. Later that night, while reviewing the camera footage from the previous shift, Marcus noticed something that made his stomach drop. The cameras clearly showed him walking through Section D with his flashlight, but behind him, about 10 feet back, a dark figure followed the entire time, moving whenever Marcus moved, stopping whenever Marcus stopped, and it never once appeared in front of him, only behind. Story 3: The Lighthouse Keeper. Late at night, along the jagged coast of Maine, a solitary lighthouse stood like a sentinel over the crashing waves. Its white paint was chipped and weathered, and the foghorn groaned in the distance, echoing across the cliffs. For decades, it had guided sailors safely through treacherous waters. Now it belonged to Elliot, a middle-aged lighthouse keeper who had taken the job after leaving the city, seeking solitude and quiet after years of restless work. Elliot's nights were mostly uneventful. He would climb the spiral stairs to the lantern room, polish the brass, wind the clockwork mechanism, and peer out over the dark ocean. The light rotated steadily, sweeping the waves like a watchful eye. Sometimes he thought he heard the faint creak of footsteps behind him, or a whisper of wind that sounded like words. But the wind was always relentless along these cliffs, and solitude had a way of playing tricks on the mind. One stormy night, around 2:15 a.m., Elliot noticed something strange while checking the radar monitor in the small control room. There was a faint signal coming from the rocks below, the jagged shoreline where no boats should have been. He squinted at the screen, adjusting the radar frequency. The blip remained, moving slowly, almost deliberately. His pulse quickened. No vessels had reported being in the area. Elliot decided to check outside. He wrapped a thick coat around his shoulders, stepped out into the cold wind, and gripped the railing of the cliffside walkway. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the black waves crashing below. His lantern swayed slightly, casting flickering shadows along the lighthouse walls. Down by the rocks, he saw a figure, tall and thin, hunched slightly, standing completely still against the jagged stones. The rain soaked him, but the figure made no movement toward Elliot, no sign that it even acknowledged him. Elliot's instincts screamed at him to retreat, yet curiosity drove him forward. "Hello?" Elliot shouted into the storm, voice barely audible over the wind and crashing surf. No response. The figure remained motionless, like it had been carved from the shadows themselves. Every instinct in Elliot's body told him to run, but he found himself drawn closer. He reached the edge of the cliff, peering down at the jagged rocks. The figure was gone. A shiver ran down his spine. Elliot could feel the salt spray on his face, the wind tugging at his coat, yet there was a quiet that felt unnatural, almost too still. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a flicker of darkness climbing the cliff face behind him, impossibly fast, slipping in and out of view, always at the edge of perception. Elliot spun around, lantern beam cutting through the storm. Nothing. Only the lighthouse walls, glistening with rain, and the black ocean beyond. Motionless, silent. He returned to the lantern room, heart hammering, mind racing. The radar monitor still showed the strange blip near the rocks. It hadn't moved, yet it seemed closer somehow, as though it had been waiting for him to notice. He shook his head, trying to convince himself it was a trick of the storm, a glitch, fatigue, anything. As the night wore on, Elliot kept glancing toward the cliffside, where lightning briefly revealed shadows that weren't there moments before. The hum of the rotating lamp, once comforting, now felt like a heartbeat echoing in an empty chamber. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not by the sea, not by the storm, but by something that existed just beyond the light's reach, patient, silent, and impossibly still. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving only a thin fog rolling over the cliffs. The radar monitor showed nothing now, no blips, no signals. Elliot stepped outside, looking down at the rocks. There was no one, only the wet stones, the receding waves, and the distant horizon. Yet he couldn't rid the image from his mind, the tall, silent figure hunched against the storm, waiting for him in the darkness. When he descended the spiral stairs later that morning, he noticed something new. Faint footprints in the wet stone, leading from the base of the cliff up toward the lighthouse. They were tall, narrow, and too perfectly formed to belong to any human he had ever known. Elliot's hand trembled as he reached out to touch them, and in that instant, a shadow flickered across the cliffside, and he knew the figure had never left. Even in the safety of daylight, with the lighthouse standing stark against the bright horizon, he could feel the presence lingering, watching from just beyond the edge of the world. And deep down, he understood that some watchers never depart. They wait, patient and silent, until the night returns. If you liked these stories, subscribe to the channel and write a comment about your scary story.